Hello, and thank you so much for joining me on the freshly minted A Podcaster Says What podcast. We're going to kick things off by exploring the anatomy of a 44-year-old virgin. Me. Now, let's be real. Exploring my actual anatomy would be very boring given the circumstances. So instead, we're going to be looking at the convergence of factors that result in someone walking this earth for nearly half a century and not having sex. I want to preface this discussion because I think my mindset, my perspective going into it is a little bit different, and I want you to understand where I'm coming from before we get into the nitty-gritty. So right off the jump, I am not proud of being a virgin. I think pride in general is a liability. It's something to be avoided at all costs. But if I was going to be proud, it would not be of this. It just so happens there is a word used to describe a certain level of sexual activity, in this case, absolute zero. It is not a part of my identity. It is not something I've embraced. It's not something that I consider synonymous with myself. And I am not going to be grieved in any way, shape, or form when it is no longer a word that pertains to me. I'm not going to be fretting on my wedding night thinking, I've been a virgin for 44 years. What am I going to do? My virginity. Not going to be a thing. It is largely irrelevant in every aspect of my life. No, it's actually irrelevant in every aspect of my life currently. And it is also irrelevant in every single relationship I am in currently. So its relevance is very limited. And it doesn't really come up organically in a lot of conversations. Strangely enough, part of the impetus for me doing this is that it had come up a few times. I was training some folks, and I was a truck driver, and I was training folks. So we're on the road for 8 to 10 hours, about 4 nights, together. You eventually start to talk about, about personal things. I mean, not hyper personal, but it starts with like, hey, do you got kids? No. Married? No. Dating? No. Have you ever dated? Well, and it kind of goes from there. And then once you admit that you are a virgin, and I don't say that as in a confession, like, oh, I'm admitting, but once it comes out, you kind of get the cockeyed look, because let's face it, I'm not an Adonis by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm also not somebody that you would look at right off the cuff and say, oh yeah, he's totally a virgin. Like my hygiene isn't bad. Like I'm doing okay. And so once that comes out, there's kind of a look of scrutiny, like what's wrong with you? And so I'm here to answer that question. What is wrong with me? This is how you go this long without having sex. So it has come up in some conversations, but for the most part, it is not a topic of conversation. So the amount of time that it actually spends in any relevance in my life is very tiny. Now there is the element of physical purity, which I totally get. The problem is I have never had that tested. That's never been a battleground for me. Once you hear my philosophy or my views on sex, you'll understand it was never a temptation. Never. There was one person, we'll call her Ellie, and she'll come up later, who had she reciprocated even a fraction of the love that I had for her, I would have been hard pressed to keep hold of my values. But aside from that, never happened. There was one time where I might have been subtly seduced, but it went over my head at the time. I only recognize it in retrospect. That's another thing we'll get to in a bit. So it hasn't been a temptation, and therefore it's nothing that it's not to my credit that I am a virgin. There's nothing I had to do to maintain my virginity. It just was never challenged. However, mental purity is a whole other story. I have been struggling with masturbation since I was 11 years old, and pornography came into the mix in college when I was 19 or 20, and I discovered the internet. So, I say struggled with it because despite the fact that it is considered very normal and very healthy, every single time I have finished masturbating, I feel very distant, very far removed from the man that I want to be. I actually feel emasculated. I feel disgusting. I feel wholly undesirable. I feel debased and ultimately pretty pathetic. It is a very crappy feeling when I'm done. In the moment, it's fantastic and there's nothing I'd rather be doing. But every time when I'm done, I feel like a piece of crap. And so obviously for that reason, I want to avoid doing it, but the allure is there. And while I'm not insecure because I'm a virgin, I am insecure to a degree at different points. I get hit with that insecurity because I've never been in a relationship. I've been on about a dozen dates probably in my entire life, and never more than 2 dates with the same girl. That's not a policy of mine. That's just how it's played out. And so I've never been anybody's boyfriend. I've never had a girlfriend. And that does, as I said, feed into some insecurity and doubts as to whether I am lovable, as to whether or not there is kind of something wrong with me, or whether that would ever change. And when that happens, the lie is, the deception is, oh, well, if I just engage in this activity, if I take care of it myself, I'm going to feel less insecure. I'm going to feel like I have more control over my love life. I'm going to feel better about myself. I'm going to feel a little bit more like a man, It's, and more importantly, at some points when there's love involved, when there's heartache involved, the thought is, well, if I can twist it into something contemptible, I can remove the pain. I can take away the pain, the sting of feeling that heartache. And the sad truth is, that's all bupkis, because when I'm done, all of that feels exponentially worse. I feel even more insecure. I feel even more alone. I feel even more undesired. And that twisting of the heartache, it doesn't change anything. It just makes me feel even further from that person that my heart is longing for. So I call that the masturbation exacerbation, because masturbation just actually makes all the bad feelings that you think you can get rid of or handle by doing it even worse. And I know a lot of people are just thinking, well, I just do it for the physical pleasure. And I totally get that, because that is a huge draw for me as well. But I have that downside on the back end. And I bring that up for a few reasons. One, because as I said, we have our own battlefields. Some people, they say, I have no problem with masturbation. I have no problem with sex, but I want to do it when I'm in a committed relationship. But then something will come up and they'll forfeit that battlefront. They'll fall. They'll slip away from what they want to hold to. And so I understand what it feels like to know up front that you're going to regret doing something and still be compelled to do it and still lose that battle. So I'm not coming at this from a holier than thou or, well, I have my purity. So same can't be said for a lot of other folks. As far as I'm concerned, when I have been tested, when my character has truly been tested and my resolve has been tested, I have failed. It doesn't matter whether it's with sex or something else. If I've drawn that line and said, this is not who I am, it's not what I want to do, and I still screw up, I'm in the same boat as everybody else, regardless of what that other stuff is. So I understand the failure, and I understand that weird idea that I know in the back of my head, regret is coming, but I'm still going through with it. And so I can relate. And again, to emphasize the fact that technical purity where, okay, I technically haven't done anything with a lady, that only accounts for so much. And the reason I'm not proud of that is because I didn't have to do anything to earn that or to maintain that. And the one area that I would have to work to maintain it, I screwed up. So not proud of being a virgin. At the same time, I am also not ashamed or embarrassed about being a virgin. And that's because, let's face it, there is no quality control, no quality assurance when it comes to sex. You don't have to be athletic. You don't have to be intelligent. You don't have to be well-spoken. You don't have to be socially adept. You don't even have to have good hygiene, for crying out loud. There is no correlation between a positive characteristic, a personality trait, and having sex. Really, the criteria is you wanted to do it and you had the physical capability of doing it. That's it. So there's no validation that can be derived from sex. I think there's a lie out there that, oh, well, if I have sex, it'll prove that I'm a man. No, it won't. You don't have to be a man to have sex. I mean, anatomically, yes, but that's not an issue. Well, I mean, for me anyway, that doesn't really say much. I wanted to have sex and I was able to do it. That doesn't make me a man. It doesn't mean that I'm desirable. A lot of people think that, oh, it's going to make me feel loved and desirable. We're going to get into what sex actually does do for us. And it creates a closeness, but that's not the same thing. If you're in a relationship where you do not feel loved or desired, sex is not going to change that. In fact, it may actually make you feel used. So there is no validation to be had from it. And there's no confirmation of a strong character or any positive attribute. So the inverse is also true. By being a virgin, by not having sex, I am not inherently deficient in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean that I'm not intelligent. It doesn't mean that I'm not desirable. It doesn't mean that I don't have good hygiene. It only means that I either lacked the desire and or the opportunity to have sex. That's all. So I don't understand why it's used sometimes as a word of derision, or it's said with scorn, because again, there's no correlation. It's not like, oh, you're a virgin, therefore these negative things must be true about you, or you must be lacking in some way. Other than the actual experience of sex itself, virgins aren't lacking anything inherently. And I think we're soon going to hear people uttering the phrase, that guy games like a virgin, or that guy's editing skills are virgin tier. Because if you think about it, who are the people that should be most likely to be amazing at what they do? It's virgins. Why? And I can say this because I am one. We have nothing better to do than get good. If we're not having sex, we're not raising families, what else do we have to spend our time on? I mean, it's very simple. We should be at the top of the apex of our craft, because that's all we have on our plates. I say that in jest, of course, because I know plenty of people that are amazing at what they do and at the top of their fields, and they're married, they have kids, what have you. So I say it in jest, but still, logically, you would think that would be the case. So one day virgin will be used synonymously with high quality, just because you got nothing better to do, get good at gaming and what have yous and whatnots. So not ashamed, not proud. And I don't see sex from the perspective of whether it's good or bad or right or wrong. I do believe there is good and evil in the world. There is right and wrong in our decisions. However, underneath of all that, the actual, what we're talking about for the most part is whether something is beneficial or detrimental. If you put your hand on a hot stove, and burn yourself, you're not a bad person. You didn't do anything wrong. What you did was detrimental to your health. And therefore, we attribute words like that it was bad or the wrong thing to do. But people kind of recoil at that because it sounds like it's a judgment. It's like somebody's saying you're right, you're wrong, or you're bad. And we don't like that part. But really, it comes down to something a lot more clinical, which are the odds higher that it's a benefit or a detriment to your life? And that is, as I said, how I think about sex. I think it's a matter of, is it more likely to be beneficial to you or more likely to be detrimental? And when we're talking about sex bereft of a long-term commitment, when we're talking about sex without that relational element to it, if you don't have those relational components, your really only benefit of sex is the temporary physical gratification. That's kind of the list. And I don't know what the actual average rate is for unassisted sexual endeavors, but I'm guessing it's under 2 hours. So a very temporary physical gratification. That's what we've got. And for some people, that's enough. They're like, the sex is that amazing. That's all I need. It is so good. I don't care what the detriment is. I don't care what the downside is. That is worth everything. And that's fine. I can't argue with that. I've never had it. I don't know. Maybe it is that amazing. But on the detriment side, you have unwanted pregnancies, you've got STDs, and as I'm going to detail, I think there is inherent with sex, there is going to be emotional and relational entanglements, confusion, befuddlement. There's a tethering of sorts. Again, we'll get into that, but I don't think we come out of a sexual encounter not unscathed, but unaffected is the right word for that, I think. And so some of those you could say are subjective, that you may not believe that those actually happen during sex, but there are some tangible detriments. And I'm just going to say temporary, speaking from somebody who has succumbed many times to the allure of temporary physical gratification, it isn't worth it. At least for me, it is more likely to be detrimental than beneficial to my life. I've never regretted not sleeping with somebody. There's not a single person that I'm like, man, I really wish I would have, pursued that with them. Nope. It's totally fine. I have no regrets. And I say that it's very important because in that perspective, I'm not looking at my friends who most at this point are fornicators. For some reason, that is how I say it in my head. Most of my friends have fornicated, and I don't look at them as lesser than. I don't look at them as sinners. I don't say, well, hopefully one day they can be better. I don't see them as bad people, as wrong people. I look at it as something that is being done to their detriment. It's like watching your friend cutting themselves with a knife, and you're looking at those wounds saying, I hope that doesn't scar. I hope it doesn't get infected. I hope it heals all right. I hope one day you don't have to keep cutting yourself. It's not from a place of judgment or condemnation. It's from a place of compassion and a little bit of grief. You're watching somebody, from my perspective, I'm watching somebody hurt themselves or do themselves harm, or at least do something that has a high risk of causing them harm, whether it's something obvious, like, completely derailing their life in a way they weren't expecting, or whether it's just getting themselves, essentially having pieces of themselves attached to many different people. And I'll explain that in a moment. But so there is no judgment. There's no guilt or condemnation coming at you through this. Just as I don't judge my friends, I'm not judging anybody else. I'm not here to try to change your mind about sex. I'm not here to try to make you feel bad about your decisions. I'm not trying to twist the knife in terms of regret. I do know there are some friends who have said, I regret doing it. It wasn't what I thought it was. I did it, because I felt that was the right thing to do in that situation, and it wasn't. And you can't really undo it. So, but I don't want to make that worse. I'm not trying to make people feel bad about it. I'm not trying to make you alter your perception of sex, but just sharing my view, my take on it. So everything I'm going to say is in love, folks. And just as a side note, you need to be able to disagree with your friends and still have a friendship. I strongly believe that a true friendship, you can accept the person, you can love the person, and still not agree with what they do. I have friends that probably don't agree with how I live my life or certain elements of that, and vice versa. My friend of 30 years, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and a lot of things that we've done, we don't agree with. Our values, for the most part, are kind of the same, but even there are some areas where we're not exactly simpatico, and that's okay. We've been friends for 30 years. We'll probably be friends for the rest of our lives. And most of my friends, if we were to get down to a bunch of different topics, we don't see eye to eye. We don't agree on that. And that's okay. So there's this myth out there that you have to stand by every decision your friend makes because that's what friends do. And that's not the case. So now that you have a kind of a baseline and understanding where I'm coming from, let's go ahead and jump into the actual anatomy, the factors that result in a life of celibacy. First and foremost, as you might imagine, it starts with how I was raised. My parents did not believe that the state, the government, the school system had a place teaching me about something as intimate and personal as sex. So they opted me out of it. So it was either 6th or 7th grade biology, I think it was. While everybody else was taking out their sex handbooks, I was called to the front of the class, given a worksheet on the food pyramid and a pass to the library, and asked to leave the room. And you would think that I would be mocked or derided for that. And maybe I was behind my back, but to my face, I was envied, because if you could get out of class for any reason, mind you, a lot of us were just barely kind of hitting puberty around that time. So it wasn't like people were chomping at the bit to learn about sex. It was more just like, wow, you got out of biology class. That's all people were thinking. How did you make that happen? What did you do? Did your parents have to write a note? And I was like, I don't know. I think the permission slip had 2 different places to sign, and they signed where it said no, no, no. So I don't know, but I did not feel like I was bereft. I mean, I didn't get graded on the worksheet. It only took me about 10 minutes. So I got to read a book for 35 to 40 minutes for almost like a week and a half. So I was completely fine. And I got to see pictures of breasts. They were chicken breasts, but they were still breasts. It still counts, right? So anyway, so I was not taught by the school system about sex. My parents said they were going to teach me what they wanted me to know about sex when they wanted me to know about it. And I don't remember when they actually said anything about it, but the essence of what they said was this: sex is how you make babies. If you are not ready to make babies, don't have sex. And I got to say, that conventional wisdom kind of holds up. I mean, for everything else that sex can be, and I do think, for the record, I think there is more to sex than just procreation. I'm not one of these people that thinks, well, unless you're trying to have babies, don't have sex. But it is impossible to deny that is the actual function of it. We have a nervous system, we have a muscular system, we have a skeletal system. We do not have a you're hot and I'm horny system. We do not have a let's strengthen the relationship system. We have a reproductive system. And so to engage reproduction protocol and not expect or not be ready for the inevitable and likely outcome of that is a little crazy to me. So for everything else that we want to add to it, and everything else that sex can be and how great it can be, it is still fundamentally how human beings bring new life into the world. And so if you're not ready for that eventuality, why would you engage in it? And I later on, it got a little more refined, a little more personal to me, which is, if sex is how you become a father. If you're not prepared to be a father, don't have sex. And again, not that I'm wanting to be a father, because honestly, up until about 3 years ago, I was really not interested in being a father. And even now, I'm not like, it's not like a burning desire, but I'm at least open to the idea. I'm like, okay, that could be a path that I need to walk in my life. That's a facet of my personality, of my character that I should engage with is being a father. And so if it were to happen, I'm going to go all in on being the best dad that I can be. But the idea is, if I'm not looking at that woman that I'm sleeping with and saying, I am prepared and I am happy, I am excited about her being the mother of my children, I'm excited about the idea of being tethered to her for the rest of my life, because whether or not we get married afterward, whether we stay together, if we have a child together, she is going to be a part of my life until one of us dies, regardless of any other relationship I end up in. If I am not sold on her 100% in that regard, probably shouldn't be having sex with her. If I'm not prepared financially, if I'm not prepared in my professional life, if I'm going, look, I am a career-driven person. I spend long hours. I'm working 12 hours a day. I'm barely around. I don't have any time or energy to give to being a father or to being, a support for my partner, I guess. Cause if you're not thinking marriage, it's just somebody that you're partnering with, hanging out with. If I'm not going to be able to shoulder some of that load, I probably shouldn't be having sex. Like I said, to me, it was common sense for a very young mind, in a very basic, fundamental way. It just made all the sense in the world. And so that put sex out of my orbit. When I said I was never tempted by it, that's a big part of it, because it was like, until I've come to this place. And I'm not saying that that people who have kids are always ready for it. I'm just saying I never wanted to be in a position where I would view my child as a consequence. To me, that's a really heartbreaking situation to bring a child into the world and viewing them as an unwanted, an undesirable consequence or result of me doing what I want to do with my life. That kind of hurts me. All that said, looking back, my parents never really told me more than that little bit. If you're not ready to sex out, you make babies. If you're not ready to make babies, don't have sex. So on my wedding night, there could be a very interesting conversation. I call my folks, Mom and Dad, is now the right time? I've got my wife here. I'll put you on speakerphone and we'll work through this. Oh, good gravy. Okay, that's actually not going to happen. But I really didn't get much more education on it than that. And I didn't really need to, because as I got older, as I said, a lot more of my friends, started engaging in sex outside of, well removed from marriage. And then a lot of my friends were getting married and therefore then having sex. And, I started, I'd take some psychology classes and stuff where they'd talk about sex. And so starting around college, I started developing my own kind of philosophy or view on sex that kind of took it to the next level. Obviously, like I said, I don't have the experience with it. So I'm not saying this and claiming to be an authority on it, but it's how it makes sense to me. Just like that idea, if you're not ready to procreate, don't engage in the act of procreation. It kind of makes sense to me when you look at all the different factors involved. And so this is what I came up with. A proposal is a statement of intent to commit. It is not actually a commitment. It is transforming the maybe sometimes for certain people, the meandering journey of just, hey, we're just kind of walking together. We're dating, we're doing life. Okay, now it's serious. Now we actually have a goal in mind. Now we have a target. We're walking towards something. And that does transform how you look at the other person and how you look at your life, because it's gone from just, we'll do whatever, to, oh, we're doing this. We're actually doing this. And so, you do have broken engagements because it is a transformative mindset, and and things that may not have been a big deal. Now you start thinking, am I okay with this for the rest of my life? And so it is an upgrade, but it is not a commitment. Marriage itself is not a commitment. It is a declaration to the powers that be, to the state, to the government, to friends, family, whoever that needs to know or wants to know, a declaration of commitment. It is not itself the commitment. The vows that we take, the vows that we say, we are essentially writing out a contract. We are writing out a covenant. And if you've ever bought a house or bought a car, the person who is kind of overseeing that can't tell you that you are committed or that you have signed the paperwork. So the priest, the rabbi, anybody standing there saying, by the power of Grayskull in the state of Connecticut, I pronounce you husband and wife. That pronunciation, that statement does not mean you are committed to each other. A third party cannot make you commit, cannot say that you are committed. They can't sign that paperwork for you. So you have these contracts that are, you're saying your vows, here's what I'm going to do, and here's for how long I'm going to do it, but they are unsigned. It's not the actual commitment. The wedding itself is a party. It's a ceremony. It's there to commemorate the occasion. It's there for people to bear witness. It's there to celebrate. Hey, these two crazy kids found love in this messed up world. How awesome is that? Give them a hand. It's a party. It's not a commitment. The commitment, the signature on that contract, is the consummation of the relationship, is sex. Sex is the crown of intimacy. It is the last thing that we do as individuals before being joined inextricably to someone else, forming a whole new relationship, a whole new identity. And it doesn't mean that we lose our individual identity, but that whole concept of two becoming one, I think, is a very real thing. And so sex is that moment that when you consummate it, when you sign that contract, now you are together. Now you are moving forward, joined in life. And so it makes sense to me, with bearing that in mind, I'm not going to commit the actual act. I'm not going to sign that contract until I'm ready to commit. So the idea of, I'm going to commit, I'm going to be bonded together with this person, and then I'll decide whether or not I love them, or then I'll decide whether or not I want to spend the rest of my life with them. That just don't make no sense, Sex is, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, there are things that come with sex. I think sex is a bonding agent. Sex brings a closeness. It brings a level of physical intimacy. It brings a comfort level with that person. There is inherently with it a feeling of being joined together, of being with that person, of knowing that person, but it's not actual relationship building. It's not relational intimacy. It can feel that way because of the closeness, but it's not actually building the relational intimacy. It's not actually creating a foundation. Foundations for relationships are formed from bricks and concrete. It's from communication. It's from sacrifice. It's from time and time being able to show that you trust each other. It's from going through hard times and coming out on the other side. It's understanding one another. It's understanding what resonates with the other person, what makes them come alive, what crushes them, what devastates them, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how you can help out with that and partner with them in that. That's all how you build a relationship that the weight, a foundation that the weight of a relationship can rest on, not the glue. Glue is not a foundation. It's not a building block. It's not a foundational thing. So if sex is introduced very early on in the relationship, or it is kind of what the relationship is based around, I think that's where you end up with people 2 years down the road going, I don't even think I know you. It's because sex is not something that allows you to get to know that person. You're not going to fundamentally know them in a deep and profound way. There is the illusion of that, or the sensation of that, because of the closeness and because of that bonding experience, because you have, whether you acknowledge it or not, you said, I'm committed to you. And so naturally that commitment, that statement of commitment, that signature is going to knit you together in a very profound way. And conversely, or the downside of that, is anything that can join you together that strong is also going to be very difficult to tear apart. If you've ever stuck anything to the wall, you know that if you pull it off, a lot of times it's going to take off the paint and the drywall, and you're going to have a huge tear on your wall. And the backside of that adhesive is going to have bits and pieces of that wall on it. Now, the good news is you can spackle and sand and repaint that wall and pretty much make it as good as new. You can peel off all those pieces from the adhesive and more or less get it back to the condition that it was, but it's still a very difficult and painful thing. It's not meant to be torn apart. It's not like, I'm using, sticky tacky putty or something. It's meant to be where you can take it on and off. Sex is a bonding agent. It is super glue. It is there to hold you together until death do you part. It's part of that magical formula that it's going to allow you to walk through all the highs and lows with that person and still stay together. It is not meant to be removed. And when it does, pieces of us are going to end up stuck to other pieces, to other people. inevitably, because that's part of the tearing process, because you've taken something that was joined together and now it is torn asunder. And so pieces of your heart are going to be elsewhere. So it's not a pretty picture, but the main concern is avoiding making your foundation comprise solely of that glue, because when the weight of the relationship does finally settle, that glue is going to flake, crack, and crumble, and the whole thing is going to go cattywampus, and there goes the relationship. Because there's going to be times, I mean, let's face facts. I mean, hopefully, ideally, I think you can have a healthy sexual lifestyle or healthy sexual life, well into your golden years of your life. But as you get older, as you progress, it is going to become less and less of a factor. It's going to become less and less central to, your times of intimacy. And like I said, the big issue, I think you hear a lot of people where it's just, they're like, they feel that they're really close to somebody, that they really have covered a lot of ground. And it's that sex kind of, it muddies the water in that regard, in that you really don't know how well you know the person. Because if you're spending a lot of time doing the sex, it means you're spending less time, or you feel less of a need to explore that relational intimacy and to build that foundation. So you don't really know how much of this is actual intimacy, how much of this is relational intimacy, how much is this me actually knowing this person, and how much is this just me being incredibly close and comfortable and, feeling a level of intimacy, like I said, physical intimacy, where it's not a counterfeit, because sex is not, it's not a bad thing, but it can be a counterfeit, or it can be a bad thing if it is relied upon for the building of a relationship. Now, there are people, friends I have that, they waited for a while. And so they were able to build that foundation, and then sex became a part of it. And so it's, it's in the crevices, it's in the cracks, but it's still not where the focus of the relationship is. So that's how I view sex. So again, I do not want to be bonded with somebody. I don't want to be stuck to somebody until I am ready to be stuck to them for the rest of my life. So that whole idea, that concept, put sex even further outside of the reach. It wasn't even so much just about making babies. Now it's about, I'm not signing a blank contract. I'm not going to just have sex with somebody. I'm not going to commit to somebody and then figure it out afterwards. That ideal did not appeal to me. So that's a big deal. That's it, like I said, it makes it so that sex was just something that I wasn't going to approach. There was another factor that I forgot to mention, but it's very important. So not only it was how I was raised, but between the time that I was raised and the time that I kind of developed that, for lack of a better word, philosophy on sex, I also did not suffer from media erosion. And for a lot of folks, especially if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, and even today, there are people out there that will say, oh, if you play video games, it's going to make you violent. If you listen to this heavy metal song backwards, it's going to make you want to dry hump a tree. And if you watch R-rated movies, you're going to dry hump a tree and be violent. I don't know, but it's this kind of hyperbolic perspective on how media has an impact. It makes it sound like it brainwashes us and we have no choice and we're just going to become bad people. And for the record, I watch rated R movies, I play video games, and I listen to secular music. So, and I don't think it's brainwashing me. However, I do believe that just as the food we intake has an impact on our health, I think what we see, what we take in with our eyes and our ears does leave an imprint on us. I do believe garbage in, garbage out. I do believe in we reap what we sow. So on a certain level, yes, what we intake, the media, the things that we choose to watch and listen to is going to have an impact. I've talked to a lot of those people that I had this conversation with when I mentioned, driving the truck. They would refer me to these podcasts, and I'm listening to the podcasts that they're hearing, and I'm understanding now why they have the opinions they do, because they're listening to these other people and they're not necessarily filtering it. They're not saying, wait, is this legit? Is this cool? Is this right? They're just saying, oh, this is a guy that, I think he has great ideas, and so everything he says, I'm going to agree with. And so, but again, I don't think it's a brainwashing thing. I don't think it's a compulsory thing. I don't think, those things are inherently bad, but I do believe they are leaving an imprint. But more importantly, more nefariously, is the element of normalization, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's making something normal or common but because you see it all the time. It's a factor in why, one of the reasons why people who grow up in abusive homes end up going on to be abusive or to allow themselves to be abused, because that behavior is normalized in their home life. That's how they see their parents interact. That's how, that's intertwined with love. It's intertwined with family and relationships. And so even maybe in the back of their head, they're going, this isn't right, or this doesn't feel right. It's the behavior has been normalized to the point where that's what's expected. And so especially when it comes to sex, because if you think about it, this isn't water cooler conversation. I don't think, sex is some, sacred thing we should never be talking about. I'm not going to talk about my sex life. When and if I get one, I'm not going to be sharing that with folks because it is intimate. It's between me and my wife and not something I want to share. But it's still not going to be, it's not something, and even if you are willing to talk about it, it's not something, especially as you're growing up, that is just something you talk about a whole lot. So there's nothing to really frame what's normal and what isn't, except through media, through songs, through TV shows and movies. It is communicated to us socially what the norm is. And Hollywood has been very, very good about normalizing casual sex or cheap sex. And by cheap sex, I don't mean like prostitution. I mean, oh, hey, we need to show that these two characters are in love. They have sex. I mean, if you think about it, any movie that's over like a PG-13 rating, PG-13 and up, if there is any kind of romantic subplot or through line, there's going to be sex. Like that's how you confirm. That's what you do. If you think you love somebody, if you feel close to somebody, if you feel attracted to somebody, if you want to, communicate that you think you like them or that you think they're attractive, you just have sex. That's what you do. That's normal. That's like, why wouldn't you? And TV shows. I mean, I remember. Yeah, this is how kind of subtle it is. I didn't think about it until I actually thought about it. There's a show, How I Met Your Mother, a sitcom I enjoyed well enough. And there's a character on there named Barney Stinson. He's played by Neil Patrick Harris. Fantastic character. For the record, probably has one of the better developmental arcs in any sitcom, I think, until the last 2 episodes, which pretty much does everything, but that's a whole other topic. And this character, Barney, is the epitome of a player. He is the one and done, hit it and quit it, one night stand, notches on the bedpost. And the other characters in the series consider his actions, his mentality, and his behavior as gross. They often say, oh, gross, Barney, oh, geez, because he is incredibly promiscuous and he's all about finding the right pickup line, finding the right way to bed a bunch of women. And so you go, okay, well, that's promiscuity being looked at as a negative thing. But our lead guy, our Ted Mosby, who is supposed to be this helpless romantic and he's in search of his wife, he's pretty promiscuous as well. He's having sex with several women and more than 3. I'm trying to remember exactly. I mean, there's 200 episodes. He's not finding a new girl every single episode, but I mean, we're probably at least at a dozen. I haven't actually checked the show, but there's a lot of them. And I remember distinctly, there was one incident or one episode where the girl that he was into, she was like, I'm saving myself. I don't think she was saving herself for marriage, but she was like, I want to wait until further down the road in this relationship. And he was giving himself props for not manipulating or guilting her into changing her mind, which he ended up doing anyway. And so it was like, okay, this is supposed to be the romantic lead, and yet we're still being shown, it's still being normalized. Hey, 3 dates in, he should be expecting to have sex with this person. And if they aren't, then, even his friend, obviously Barney has his opinion about it, but even his friend, Marshall is like, really? Well, Marshall's a little bit different. Marshall is the actual, he had sex once with the girl that he ended up marrying, and that was it. But so he's a little bit more of a mitigating factor with that. He's a little bit more like, hey, Ted, but in general, Ted isn't called out for that. And even something like Frasier. So back in the 90s, you had Friends and Frasier. They were 2 big sitcoms, and Friends, I think in general, I think the consensus is it wasn't a great show anymore. I don't know. I mean, it was all right growing up with it. It was like, okay, cool. Jennifer Aniston was very attractive, but for Friends, because it was a younger demographic, it was kids, like the actors were in their or like 20s, 30s. It was sex, of course, was in there. And you had episodes where the guy's like, oh yeah, it's my pornography that I watch with my girlfriend. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, wait, really? Like I was always taught that, pornography was kind of something you hid from your girlfriend. But in Friends, they made it seem like it was just completely natural to watch pornography, to watch porn together. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. Now I was taught otherwise, but I found that a little bit interesting. But Frasier was ostensibly more mature. He was a psychologist. He was in his 40s. He was, had a very sophisticated lifestyle. And there was a character in there named Roz, his producer, who was very promiscuous. And that was just kind of her thing. And his, Frasier's brother Niles would call her out on it, would kind of make fun of her for it. But he was really the only character that would do that. Everything else was like, okay, that's Roz being Roz. And Frasier himself, most of the debacles he got himself into, when you really think about it, they were because he was trying to sleep with or because he had slept with somebody and it didn't turn out great. So even a show like that I wasn't thinking, oh, this is normalizing sex. When I think about it, I was like, no, it made sex as just a part of everyday life. It made casual sex very normal. So I don't want to belabor the point, but if you think about movies, you think about TV shows, how many times you hear characters say, all right, so first date, this is what you should expect. Second date, third date. If you're on your fourth date and she hasn't put out yet, you should probably get rid of her. And sometimes it's said by characters who are very crass and you're only supposed to take what they say with a grain of salt, but they're not shown to be wrong. And if it's said in every movie or every, rom-com or, like the Bachelor, not the Bachelor, what is it called? I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a lot of like very popular comedies, like guy buddy comedies, where there's a character or multiple characters who have that view, and it's never like, no, that's not normal. Why would I do that? Or that's not a good expectation to have. It was just, that's normal. Like a girl should be willing to sleep with you after 4 dates. Otherwise, like she's a prude. That's kind of weird. And so it doesn't have to be overtly stated, but over the course of time, watching these shows, and again, with music, it's not saying, hey, sex is awesome, go have sex. But it's like, oh, I love you so much. And we had this time together and it was so beautiful and it was so wonderful. Again, it's not an intentional thing, I think, for a lot of people. They're just saying this is how I live my life. But by listening to it, by watching it, it just becomes normal behavior. So how do you go from this is how you make babies and start a family to this is just something, this is what life is about. The world does not revolve around the sun. It revolves around sex. This is how you have fun. This is what it means to be free and to be free thinking. This is what it means to just enjoy life to the fullest. This is what it means to YOLO, is to just have these relationships and just find sex wherever you can and just enjoy the heck out of it. And there was even I think there was even a master class, for crying out loud, which is where they bring like a celebrity or somebody who's like an expert in the field and they do like an online training thing. Usually it's like directing, acting, writing, creative stuff. But they actually brought somebody on there who was just talking about how sex is like a right and how you should explore it and why you should explore it and why it's important to, fundamental. It's like part of a complete breakfast. It's part of a complete life is to have sex. And let me just say for the record, 44 years in, folks, living a full life, loving life, sex is not necessary to live a full and happy life. But I'll get into that a little bit more later. So all of that to say, there is a process of normalization, or what I call media erosion, that can happen. I was inoculated from that. My mother was stay at home, which I didn't appreciate as much at the time, but in retrospect, I definitely do. It was great having her there, when I get home from school. But she was very, she made sure she vetted pretty much everything I watched and listened to. If there was a scene that she didn't like, if there was an episode that didn't work for her, it went on the no-fly list. And I was a very obedient kid. So if it was on the no-fly list, I didn't watch it. And I didn't listen to it. I didn't have secular music. I had a few cassettes that had Christian music. My CDs was DC Talk Free at Last, DC Talk New Thing, Carmen Revival in the Land, and Michael W. Smith Change Your World. I remember distinctly those four CDs were all I had on my shelf for the longest time. It wasn't until I think I was 15 or 16 and I was riding the bus and it had a new stereo system in it. And the bus driver would have us listening to hip hop on the way to school and then alternative rock on the way back. That was my first consistent exposure to secular music. Up until that point, I was listening to songs about love and faithfulness and, sharing and caring and all that good stuff. So I was insulated. So I had that, what I was taught, that sex is about making babies, or you need to be ready to make babies if you want to have sex. That's what I was taught. And that was never challenged because nobody was telling me anything different. School didn't teach me anything because I was opted out of it. Movies didn't teach me anything. Even when my dad started sneaking in some rated R movies on the down low, Mom, sorry, I was probably, 13 or 14 and Dad was letting me watch rated R movies, but it was like Predator, RoboCop, Terminator, And even Terminator has a sex scene in it, but my dad would just fast forward through it. And that's when I first learned that there's nothing significant that happens during a sex scene, because I was trying to convince him, like I wasn't trying to watch it. And for Terminator, there's really nothing to see per se. But like I said, he would just fast forward. I'm like, Dad, but I want to know what's happening. But like, maybe they say something, maybe they do something that like is really important to the story. Like, I don't want to miss part of the movie. And he just kind of would look at me like this. And I was like, oh. And then eventually when I got older and I was able to watch him on my own, it was like, oh yeah, nothing important happens during a sex scene. There is no value to a sex scene in a movie. Like if you at most, if you want to say the characters had sex, okay, that's one thing. But the actual scene, it's just a tedious bit of nothing, because it doesn't say anything about the characters. There's never any really great dialogue. It's just kind of like low key pornography. It's like, okay, well, it's kind of needless. I don't fast forward necessarily through it now, but that was even when I was watching rated R movies, that element was taken out of it. So again, there was nothing to erode what I'd been taught growing up. So that's a big factor as well. And then, like I said, when I got into college, I was then experiencing it through or seeing it through some of the classes that I took, but also through my friends' relationships and other people's relationships. And that's how I kind of formulated my own philosophy on it. So that's how I viewed sex. It's how I view sex now. It is a commitment. It is not, there's nothing else to it. It is my signature. And I personally am not going to commit until I am ready to commit. But that was never an option, because my take on dating is also something that is outside of the norm as well. I never wanted to date, never had a desire to date for the fun of it. I'm an introvert, so I don't need that relationship. I don't seek out relationships because I'm lonely. I get lonely maybe twice a year. Like if I have human contact 2 or 3 days out of the year, I'm okay. I mean, maybe a little bit more than that, but I'm used to being by myself. Okay. Don't let your mind go to where I was talking about initially. I'm used to being by myself, doing things by myself. And so I don't seek it out for that reason. For me, the only purpose in dating is pursuing that life together. And so for me, if the imagery of it is me with this young lady, whoever it is, and I've gotten to know her a little bit, and I'm drawn to her, I'm attracted to her. And so I'm standing there with her, and I'm essentially going, okay, I see a path in front of us, and there's a hill, and I lose the path over the hill, but then I see it in the distance. Okay, now it's winding through a forest, lose it through some of the forest. Now I see it kind of going through the valley. Now I see it going up the mountain. Okay, can't see it around the back side of the mountain, lose it through some of the forest. There's a little bit of fog. I don't see it there either. But at the very top, I do see a glowing beacon, Holy Grail as it were, but the altar. I see a life spent together, a lifetime spent together. I see the potential for that. And I want to try to walk there with you. Now, that's not saying that we are going to get married or that I'm courting you and with the intention of marrying you. It's essentially just saying, I see a path that does lead there. But who knows? Right over the crest of that hill, that hill could end in a cliff and it just drops out into nothing and the relationship is over. There could be bears and lions in the woods that, maul our relationship and it's not going to survive. In that fog, we could get lost and never make our way up. There are many reasons why the relationship isn't going to work out, and that's okay. But I'm not doing this just for the fun. I'm not just going to wander around the field with you. I want to walk this path towards that goal with purpose from the outset. And I'm not vouching for anything other than my intent. For me, if I ask a girl out, that is me vouching for my heart. That is me saying, there is something here on my end, and I want to see where it's going to go. Like right now, without knowing where the pitfalls are and everything, I'm saying I'm willing to say, yeah, unless something happens that derails this, unless there is some precarious thing on this path, I want to marry you. And that's again, not 100%, because obviously then I'd be like, hey, let's commit right off the jump. But it's saying that I see that potential there. And for me to say that requires, or it's at different points, it requires 3 different things: attraction, mutual attraction, connection, and compatibility. And spoiler alert, never had all 3. And it was hard enough. Mutual attraction is a very difficult thing to have. There's a settling effect that can happen if you discover that somebody is attracted to you, if they really like you and you find them attractive, then a lot of times people will just take that as, okay, that's good enough. Like they're into me and I think they're objectively attractive, so we'll be able to make this work. That's not how it works. Attraction gets a bad name. Attraction is considered to be superficial and shallow. People try to poo-poo that and say, oh, well, if you're, just because you're not attracted doesn't mean, that you shouldn't be with that person, which is a load of crap. Attraction is exactly what it sounds like. It is being inextricably and powerfully drawn to another person. And there are different levels of attraction. And I would say this, if the embers are there, if there are glowing embers of attraction, like meaning you look at that person, you're not like, whoa, I am inexplicably and powerfully drawn to you, but I'm inexplicably and somewhat drawn to you. I'm intrigued by you. I feel a pull towards you. It means there's something there. And I think in those situations, getting to know that person can, not always, and probably not even most of the time, but it can burst into flame. It can create, it can become a very powerful attraction and something that will hold you and sustain you for the rest of your relationship with that person. But most of the time, if there's no attraction there whatsoever, you're just like, no, she's very attractive. I just don't feel anything for her. If there's nothing there, I don't think there's a chance of it being kindled just by getting to know that person. I'm not saying that's a lie, but I think that's a misconception. It's something that people can convince themselves of because they want to try being in a relationship. But if there's nothing there, I don't think it grows from nothing. There has to be a little something there to begin with. But attraction is not superficial. And to articulate this is this phrase: I am not attracted to you because you're beautiful. I find you beautiful because I'm attracted to you. In other words, like for the longest time, I never was big on fair skin. It just didn't appeal to me. I didn't find it to be a quality that I really liked until I fell in love with and became attracted to a girl who had fair skin. And then fair skin became attractive to me because I was attracted to her. So I find somebody beautiful because I'm attracted to them. I can say that somebody is attractive and not be attracted to them at all. And I personally use the word beautiful in a more intimate way, meaning like there's something about you that who you are as a person, the whole package, you are beautiful to me. I can't express why. I can't say why. I'm not going to say, oh, it's because your eyes or because your smile. There's just something about you that's beautiful. If I'm not feeling that all around, I would just say she's pretty or she's attractive. But, so just that warning, don't be lulled by saying, oh, that person's attractive and they're really interested in me, so it's all good. You need to be attracted to them. There needs to be a drawing. That phrase, absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's because attraction is drawing you together, is drawing people together. It's putting you in close proximity to each other. And if you have to be separated for any reason, military or there's just how life goes and you have to, long distance dating or whatever, you're going to, once you separate, that attraction never goes away. That attraction is always there. But once you're together, you're not feeling that pull necessarily all the time. That's, people talk about the honeymoon phase. It's like, okay, we're together. You just don't feel that you're being pulled together. You're being held there, but you don't feel the pull until you start to separate, until you pull away. And then you start to feel that attraction trying to draw you together again. And so that's how you get an increased fondness. That's how you become, longing. You develop a longing and a yearning for that person because you are being separated and that attraction is still trying to pull you together. And as I said, for me, not for me, in general, attraction needs to be a two-way street. It doesn't have to be matched. It's like if you can be drawn to somebody a lot stronger than they are, but it needs to be mutual. And that has been very difficult for me to find in my life. Usually if I'm attracted to somebody, if I'm drawn to somebody, they won't even give me the time of day. It's not even close. There have been a few times where that attraction, and I would say in retrospect, a lower level attraction has been mutual, but I will not ask a girl out. I will not engage a relationship without that attraction. Even if it's just the embers, typically I won't go there because I think we've all experienced what it's like to have our love or our hearts taken for granted, where that person, being with that person is like the most important thing. If you set up a date on a Friday, that is a date you mark on the calendar. It's a date you're thinking about. It's, you're super excited. Come hell or high water, you are going to be there for that date. because you're drawn to that person. You want to spend your time with that person. If that other person is a little more lukewarm, they're kind of like, you're attractive and you're cool and you seem interesting, but I don't know that I'm really feeling anything, but I'm signing off. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go on. Let's just see what there is to see. For that person, it's just a Friday. And so if they have to cancel, or if, they get a minor headache or something, they may blow it off, and because it's not important. It's just another day. It's another interaction. But for you, it means, a lot more. And once you've experienced that once, you know how crappy it feels to realize, and hopefully you realize that at the outset, but it's really bad if you're several dates in and you just realize, this person, I'm carrying all the weight of this relationship. This person really doesn't care about me the same way I care about them. They don't have that strong desire. They don't have that where they just can't help themselves. They want to be with me all the time. They don't feel that. And to put it in perspective, there's a girl, codename Ellie, who was the longest relational pursuit I had. Ellie, for our first date, I initiated the contact with Ellie, but she was the one who first asked me out because we were separated by 6 hours. She was going to college in a completely different state. And so I wasn't going to ask her out because I was like, I don't know how that would work, but she invited me to a dance that her college had. And I hate dances. I absolutely hate dances. My body doesn't understand dancing. It doesn't understand why I'm moving in those particular ways. But I was powerfully drawn to Ellie, and I wanted to be a part of her life. And so I was 100% on board to drive those 6 hours. Not a problem. In fact, I loved every minute of it. I wouldn't say I did this to every person, but almost the entire way there. The traffic was pretty light early in the morning. I'd look over and I'd think to myself, I don't know where you're going. I don't know what you're doing, but I guarantee you are not having the amazing day that I'm going to have, because this woman who I find amazing wants to spend time with me. Like, I cherished that thought for the entire 6 hours down, and even the 6 hours back when everything was over. That's how I felt. In contrast, later on down the road, one of her emails had the following words: I don't love you. I'm never going to love you. And I don't want to love you. So a bit of a disconnect. And so once you've experienced that, and probably not that polarized, like, you may not have driven 6 hours to be with somebody. They may not have just cut you down so low by saying something like that. But once you understand what it's like to be in a lopsided relationship where it's not mutual or it's not equal, and you know how bad that feels, I would assume very reluctant to lead somebody on, to accept somebody's love, knowing that you don't share that, you can't give that back. So I've been very, very guarded in who I will ask out. I have to be able to vet my own attraction, and in theory, hopefully some connection as well. And that's the next step. So, when it comes to attraction, I would say there were three people that I dated, 3 gals that I dated or went on dates with, like I said, no more than 2 with each one of them, where, okay, there was mutual attraction. The strongest 2 was one of them was Ellie, which, as you just heard how that turned out. Another one was, we'll just call her Blue Eyes, because she's only going to come up once. But she made it very clear. I asked her out and she said, look, I'm in love with this other guy. He doesn't see me that way, but that's where my heart is. So I'll go with you. I'll go to dinner with you, but as a friend, like, I'm happy to get to know you. I'm happy to talk to you, but just know that I don't consider it a date. And so I had a choice to make whether or not I still wanted to do it. And I did, because I still wanted to get to know her. I still wanted to spend that time with her, even if it wasn't going to go any further than that. And so we had a great dinner, and it was a good time. Those were the 2, in retrospect, those were the 2 strongest attraction incidences that I felt. And like I said, it wasn't reciprocated. The other 2, looking back, was a little more low key, but it was still there. I was like, okay, you've got a great smile. Like, I feel attracted to you enough. And I've seen you enough. I've seen how you interact with our mutual friends and everything enough for me to be intrigued and to think, hey, there could be something here. And so I asked them out, and they said yes. So it did happen. It was just very rare. So that moved us to the connection part of the relationship, the connection phase. And that's where, of course, you're already attracted. You're already in close proximity. Now you're trying to connect. Now you're trying to become comfortable and find resonance with that other person. You're trying to dig deeper into who you are, what makes you tick, fundamentally, the building blocks of who you are. And you're hoping that the deeper you go, the more you're going to connect and the more solid that connection will be. And the more intense that connection with you, the more intense the connection is between that person. And so that's part of the dating process as you get to know them. And so one of the gals, our first date was phenomenal. It was like 6 hours or so. We went out, we kind of walked through a small town, and we had we went to like this Middle Eastern restaurant, never had that kind of food. Very, very niche, very unique. And we spent a lot of time there, about 2.5 hours, just talking and enjoying the process. And then when I went to drop her off, we ended up sitting in the car for another 3 hours, just talking. We just could not stop talking. And she had class that next day and I had work or something. So eventually it got to the point where, look, we're enjoying the heck out of talking to each other, but out of respect for what we have to do in 5 hours, we have to wake up and start our day. We have to force ourselves to stop talking and we just know that we can pick up this conversation on our next date, which is, I think we set that for next Thursday or Friday. And we were both excited for it. We both enjoyed it. And like I said, neither one of us wanted the night to end, but we had to do it. It was our fault for doing it. Well, we didn't do it it was Friday night. I think it was just, maybe she didn't have class. I don't know. We both had places to be the next day, or later that morning, I should say, because it was like 2:30 in the morning. Anyway, but the second date was very different. We started off okay, but on that first date, the connection wasn't superficial, but it was just your basic things. We became very comfortable around each other. We kind of tied in some compatibility, which is the next step. We realized, our faith, our the way we looked at life, kind of our outlook in general, some of our history, some of the way we were raised. We had a lot of common ground there, and we started connecting. We got a little deeper and we started connecting, but we didn't really go super deep. We were just, at that level, and it was like, oh, cool. Like there was a degree of resonance. We were feeling a connection to a degree. That second date, we picked up where we left off, and that's where things started going awry, because we were, as we got deeper, we realized what we wanted to do in life, what we were passionate about, some of the ways we looked at our future and what we were aspiring to. We were not connecting. We were no longer resonating. And the conversation kind of got awkward. We had a lot of dead spots. And I would say, to both of our credit, we kind of realized what was happening. And so each of us would try very gamely, once the conversation died, we would try to start it up again, and made a very noble attempt to continue having, conversing, but it just didn't work. It became a labor. And so when the date was done, there was no sitting in the parking lot, sitting in the driveway talking. We were just kind of like, all right, well, let's, we'll see what happens. And, maybe I'll call you, kind of thing. And it was a mutual, we both were just kind of understood this doesn't have the legs. We don't connect deeply enough or profoundly enough for this to keep going. We're really struggling to make this work. And so it kind of just trailed off. And that was the end of that relationship. And I mean, we could still hang out and everything, because there was no tearing. There was no separation. Like I said, we would never consider ourselves to be dating. We were in the very initial stages of just getting to know each other. So it wasn't painful, but we just had to move on. And I had a similar thing with one other gal. It was a little less mutual at the outset. I think she was pretty much had wanted to move on after the second date. And she kind of made it very clear, because I was like, I was trying to set up a third date, and she kept, well, I got this thing happening, and well, that's not going to work for me. And here's the thing, folks. And I know this may be wrong to do, but for me, when I think about dating, I think about how I feel and how I behave. If a girl that I'm really interested in asks me to do something and I can't do it for whatever reason, I'm not going to just say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it. Maybe next time. I will say, I can't make that, but you know what? There's another showing of that movie in, tomorrow, if you'd be down, or, hey, I'm available on this day. Or, so I have a counter offer. In other words, if I'm interested in that person, I try to take advantage of their interest, and not take advantage of it, but try to, capitalize it and say, okay, well, I can't do it for this, but if you want to hang out, here's an alternative. Here's a time that I can do it. Not only because I do want to see them, but also to let them know that I am actually interested, that I'm not just trying to blow them off. And so if I ask a girl, for a date, and she just says, oh no, I can't do it. To me, that's her saying, not really interested. Maybe you would say, well, no, that's her saying, try harder. And, I might be compelled to give it another shot if I really feel attraction to her, but in general, I'll just let it rest. And that's what happened with this gal. She just kind of, I think twice, she just kind of made a reason why she couldn't be there. And I realized, okay, she's not interested in a third date. And I think a day or two after I let that sink in, I was okay. I was like, yeah, no, that's probably a good call on her part. Like we really weren't tracking we weren't building momentum. So again, 2 dates and done. So that's as far as I've gotten with the connection. There's only been one person who I got to the final phase. And these are not level of importance. It's just kind of level of development. And that is compatibility. And the thing that sucks about compatibility is it's not sexy. It is the nuts and bolts of a relationship. Attraction, like I said, you feel that. You feel the love. You feel the being drawn together. Connection, when something resonates, when someone resonates with you, you feel it in a profound way. And usually, if you're working those two aspects out in your relationship, you're probably talking weeks, if not months, maybe even years into the relationship where you start realizing, okay, now especially if you get engaged and you're now looking to spend the rest of your life together, you start thinking about compatibility. Everything from what temperature do you have the thermostat set at, to do you want kids, to where do you want to live? Are you looking at a career? Okay, so we have faith in common, but really these particulars of it, like, do you believe in this? Do you think this? How would you handle this particular situation? Again, it's not sexy, but these are things that you can't disregard. And I think the trap that a lot of people fall into, because if you've already gone through all that process of having the attraction and the connection, you don't want to throw that away because of compatibility, because the compatibility doesn't really feel compelling. It's not like we have to have this. I think what a lot of folks end up saying is, we'll figure it out. And that's not how it goes. That is not how it happens. I think that's one of the reasons why we have the separation several years into a marriage, because people assume that they can figure it out. Love conquers all. Let's get this straight. Perfect love conquers all, but we do not operate in perfect love. We operate in a very imperfect love. And that imperfect love doesn't conquer everything, because we can't operate in the fullness of that love. So there are going to be some obstacles that are just insurmountable, and for all intents and purposes. And it's a really unfortunate place to realize you're in a relationship where, okay, we really did not get into compatibility enough. But like I said, more than likely, with those first two locked in, the attraction and connection, the compatibility is going to be an afterthought. It's going to be something where, again, just people say, we'll figure it out. We'll make it work because we have this love going on. And that doesn't really happen. And that's where I got with, we'll give her the code name Angie. Angie and I met on Match.com. I was 22 at the time, so just recently out of college. And she was the only person on Match that I was interested in. I went through all the profiles that came up, and she was the one and only person. She's the only one I reached out to. And in fact, I closed my account after that because I wasn't interested in anybody else. It was her or nobody. And it kind of had this whirlwind thing. We were both writers. I still have them, these really long emails back and forth over distance. And there were some surreal aspects to it in terms of how we ended up, connecting, because initially she didn't respond, and I thought she didn't like me, but she was actually in the hospital. And then my account was closed, but then she was able to figure out by using clues what my email address was. And it was just this crazy stuff. So it seemed to have destiny. It seemed to have fate written into it. So we had the attraction because, I reached out to her. I had, 10 pictures. She had 10 pictures. I could vouch for my attraction to her. I read her profile. I felt there was a connection. There were a lot of different aspects to that. And then as we began corresponding, the connection got deeper and deeper because we just had a lot of things in common in the way we saw things. Now, to be fair, or one thing to point out, of course, I was a virgin at that point. I still had my wedlock ring. It was a silver ring with a heart with a key in it. It was my covenant that I'm not going to have sex till I'm married. She was not in the same boat. She had several sexual relations, or a couple sexual relationships. I don't know how many. We didn't really talk about the numbers, but she had sex before. But she had said, again, when I talk about the experiences where, even though I didn't have sex, I've know people that have experiences. She said, things got really complicated and got really messy with relationships where she brought sex into it. So she was from that point on saving herself for marriage. And some people get disgusted with that for some reason. I don't know why. They say they feel like it's a tease. And but for me, somebody who believes in that kind of purity, I'm all about that. I'm like, hey, as long as you have your heart, I don't care if you've had sex before. So it wasn't a big deal to me. But I thought we were simpatico. We were both said, we are not going to have sex till we're married. And that was really the only place where it wasn't that. And so we connected on that. That was actually a point of connection. Me coming from just what I believed and how I was raised and the philosophy that I developed, and her coming from bad experiences with not waiting. So we had that to connect on. But anyway, we had all these emails. We corresponded. It got to the point where we were already talking about, hey, my parents already know about you. I know they're in a different state. Like, when can we arrange to meet each other's parents? I was looking at rings. We were not engaged because we hadn't even met yet, but we had connected on such a profound level that we were both pretty much sold on going the distance with this relationship. When we finally did meet, it was a date in DC, and it was about a 13-hour date. We started the day right around 11 o'clock or so. We drove downtown. Cherry blossoms were in bloom. We sat on the steps of the different memorials and just enjoyed that time together. We went out and had lunch. We walked through more of the city. We had a great dinner. We went and saw The Passion together. We got locked in the mall because the theater was attached to the mall, and we went out the wrong exit. And so we ended up in like a Macy's on the third floor with the furniture and stuff, and the lights went out and we couldn't get out, and the doors were locked. We had to wait 30 minutes for the security guard to come get us out. By the time we got back to her place, I parked, we had some more conversation, and then she started gently doing some things that were like, increasing the physical proximity. She first was like, "Can I hold your hand?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I think we'd actually even held hands while we were walking. Like when we were on the Lincoln, I think it was the Lincoln Memorial, we were on the steps. Or the Jefferson Memorial, we actually held hands for the first time. But then she was like, "Can I hug you?" And I was like, "Okay." And I began to get the feeling that this was leading up to a kiss. And I had never kissed anybody up to that point. Well, not on stage. In college and high school, I had roles where I had on-stage kisses, but I'd never actually kissed a girl at 22. And I kind of thought it was time. I told myself I wasn't going to give away my first kiss until I was engaged. But again, for all intents and purposes, we were engaged. So I felt okay with it. And so we ended up kissing and then making out. It was a very vanilla making out. My hands stayed in appropriate places, but I got to kiss a gal for the first time, and it was fantastic. And so that's how the night ended. And so to me, it was a magical thing, a whirlwind. It was wonderful. We connected very strongly. But again, we were about 3 hours apart. And so it was a little while before we could have our second date. And unfortunately, she was not feeling well. She wasn't sick, but she wasn't feeling great. And so we just agreed that I would come visit her and kind of just, take care of her a little bit and just hang out in her apartment. And so, yeah, we watched, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. She was a big fan of Jimmy Stewart. I can't say we connected on that necessarily, but, I enjoyed just hanging out and watching that with her. We read poetry. We read our poetry to each other. Yeah, it's a little cringy, sure. But, and we did that. We were actually in our bedroom at that point. We were on our bed. And at one point she was like, I'm kind of tired. I kind of want to rest for a little bit. I'm going to lay down. Would you lay down next to me? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? So we're laying in bed, and I'm laying next to a pretty girl that I'm going to marry one day. This is so great. And she reached over and grabbed my hand, and very gently. It wasn't like grabbed it. She's kind of, she was kind of stroking my arm, and she grabbed my hand, and then she kind of turned over and pulled my hand over with her. So my hand was on her shoulder, and she made me a big spoon. It was my first time spooning. So now I'm a big spoon. And I'm just thinking, yeah, I'm cuddling with the love of my life. How awesome is this? And then she kind of sighed and put her hand up and moved her hair away from her ear and off of her neck and just kind of, sighed essentially. And I'm just sitting there blissfully unaware. Because here's the thing. We said we were not going to have sex until we're married. So there was no way she was possibly trying to entice me, because we weren't married yet, so we weren't going to have sex. So it didn't occur to me. That's when I alluded to earlier that I think that was a very subtle attempt on her part at seduction. And the reason why I think that is because that second date was not as great as the first one. And it ended a lot sooner, but the relationship, it wasn't like the other ones where it was like, oh, it's over. It was just kind of like something doesn't feel right about this. And not long after we started having these conversations, and it came up where she said, I can't marry a guy who I don't know I'm sexually compatible with. And this was a head scratcher to me because as far as I knew and still know, there is no way to verify sexual compatibility without having sex. It's not like you fill out a form. And the concept of that back then was very befuddling to me because I knew even less about sex than I do now. And I'm like, what compatibility? We're talking square peg, round hole. How exactly can we not be compatible? I'm a man, you're a woman. Like what is the whole compatibility thing? And I've since learned that, yes, that's a thing, that sex can be good. It can be not good. There's a spectrum of how good the sex can be. This is one of the perks of being a virgin, folks, that I happily will say. I'm not going to have anything to compare it to. Whatever the sex is with my wife, that's what sex is. That's the cap. Now, I do believe, from what I understand, you can work on it. You can figure out what works for the other person, what gets the motor running, as it were, or what have you. And you can work on it, but whatever that is, I don't have anything to compare it to. I'm not going to be like, well, I know sex can be amazing. This is not amazing. This is just great. It's going to be what it is. And I'm okay with that. But she was saying, I need to confirm this. I'm like, well, how are we going to confirm the sexual compatibility that's so important to you if we're not having sex till we're married? And that's when I realized, no, she had always intended to have sex. She just was saying that. I don't know why. I don't know if she just wasn't thinking that far ahead, but we hit a roadblock right there because I'm like, well, I'm not going to have sex with you until we're married. And I at that point, I really hadn't even developed the whole sex is the commitment. Sex is the commitment. I hadn't gotten to that point yet, but it still didn't make sense to me. Why am I going to do something that is, in essence, a commitment to you, only to say, well, that's not the commitment. And I've heard since I've heard people say that I need to make sure that it is we're compatible. And to be honest, I it's been 3 or 4 times, and all those times it's been a woman. So I don't know if there's a correlation there. I don't know if it is a girl thing or if that just happens to be who I've heard say it. But I understand that's a thing, but it is very perplexing to me because essentially what you're saying is we have this attraction. It's not easy to come by. We have this connection that is really difficult to come by. I love you. I believe you're the one for me. I believe you're my soulmate. That's the connection phase is where that soulmate concept, I think, gets solidified, where it's like, wow, we just connect on a way that just makes it seem like we were made for each other. But you say, you're my soulmate. You're the love of my life. I am prepared to spend the rest of my life with you. But if the sex isn't great, if it's not to my liking, I'm going to throw all that away. Because you know what? I'm sure I'm going to come across that again. It is so common. It is so normal. It is so often that you find the mutual attraction. It's so often that you find this deep, soul mending connection with somebody that I can find that again, no problem, because the sex is really the important thing. The world revolves around sex. If our sex life isn't the most amazing thing in the world, it's not worth having. And if that's genuine, then the truth is, on the other side of it, if we get married and something happens where I am not able to have sex with you, like an injury or something, whether it's permanent or just really long term, you're going to divorce me because in your opinion, in your view, sex is one of the most important things. It's a key point of compatibility. And so if it's not good or we can't have sex anymore, there's no point in being in this relationship. Because you have made that a paramount. You've made that a big deal. You've made that a focal point of the relationship. And I do think, like I said, I think it does do amazing things. Does create that closeness. It does bond you together, but that shouldn't be the end all be all. And I know I'm coming from a place of ignorance here. I know I'm coming from a place of naivete, but my understanding is if I love this person, the actual sex, the physical aspect of it isn't the most important thing. It is sharing this connection with this person. It is getting to know this person. It is having that physical intimacy paired with our relational intimacy. It is this quality time that we're spending together. That I don't know how that can be incompatible, how that could be insufficient. Just because the sensation or the actual act is a little bit awkward or is not optimal. Like I don't see that. And maybe I'll understand one day. Maybe, I'll get married and I'll be like, oh, this is what bad sex is like. Okay, I get it. But I don't see that happening. But the process of the ceremony, the party, the wedding isn't going to magically transform sex from being super important to not being important at all. Meaning, I understand there's a difference. If you see sex as the commitment, then it doesn't make any sense at all, because you're saying, I want you to commit before I decide I'm going to commit. I want you to sign a blank contract, essentially. But if you're just saying, okay, I see commitment and sex as two different things, sex needs to be there before the commitment, the distinction would be, well, I'm not committing to a marriage on one of those. It's like, well, once I've committed, once I'm married, then if something happens, I just have to live with it. I understand there is that distinction somewhat, but the principle is still the same. If you're okay with being married to me without sex, even if we can't have sex, then you're admitting that the relationship can function. You can have a good life. Either you're saying, I'm willing to relegate my life to misery and suffering and just acknowledge that my relationship is going to be subpar for the rest of my life because I'm married. And if I can't have sex, that's how horrible my life is going to be. Or you're admitting that sex isn't the end all be all and that you can still have a fulfilling relationship with your spouse absent of sex. And I would say that mediocre sex or not great compatibility sex is probably better than no sex at all. So I don't understand that mentality. And so to me, it wasn't the fact that we weren't sexually compatible or that we didn't know we were sexually compatible that made us incompatible. It was the fact that she thought we weren't incompatible as a couple unless we had the sexual compatibility. So it's a few stages removed, but that was a compatibility issue. That's what she believed. That's how she saw sex. That was her view of it. And I'm sorry, I'm not interested in a sex audition. And I don't believe that the sex can really be good. If I were to have indulged her, I'm going, okay, I'm doing this. I'm auditioning for the role of her husband. I'm auditioning for a sex partner for the rest of our lives. That's probably not going to create the best results. I'm probably going to be a little bit more nervous and more anxious than I normally would be because I'm trying to perform. I'm trying to say, hey, no, I'm good. We're good. Because for me, the attraction and connection, once they're there, I'm like, again, we do have to look at compatibility in different ways, but that is not one area that I was willing to throw away a relationship over. And she was. And that is the extent. That's the furthest I've ever gone with a relationship. And so never even brought sex into the equation. And I will say this, just something to think about. If you smack your shin on the bed, I think we've all done that. You should feel pain. It should hurt because that is your body's natural way of saying, hey, something went awry here. There's an injury there. You might want to look at it, make sure it's not getting worse. May want to tend to it to knit it together. Pain is your body's way of saying there's an issue. Make sure you address it. It's a good thing, even though it hurts. If you don't feel pain, if you smack your shin on the bed and you don't feel pain, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel pain. It doesn't mean, oh, that's just the way it's supposed to be. It means there's something, and I hate to say the word, but there's something wrong. There's something broken because maybe it's a lack of circulation. Maybe it's a nerve ending thing, but there's something awry if you don't feel that pain. The lack of pain doesn't mean you shouldn't feel it. And it's the same thing with sex. If you don't feel connected to somebody, if you don't feel that you are now joined to somebody by virtue of the act of committing yourself to that person, if that doesn't make you feel close to that person, if that doesn't bond you or entwine you to them in some way, and you can just tear that off and it's not a big deal, I'm saying, I venture to say that that's not okay, that's not a normal thing, that if you're not feeling pain when you smack your shin, there's indicating there's something wrong. If you're not feeling that, there's probably something broken that you want to get addressed, because just as the party doesn't magically transform sex from being important to not important, that party, that ceremony, that marriage, that certificate, that declaration of commitment is not going to transform an act that is just something you do for fun or something that you do with somebody that you care about, but you really don't feel connected to them. Having that party is not going to magically transform that from meaningless or just something that you do with that person to something significant. If it doesn't have significance before the party, it's not going to have significance afterward. You can say, well, no, because as far as I'm concerned, now I've committed to that person. And so now it has meaning. No, now you're doing the act that had a very limited meaning that you did not feel entwined with, that you didn't feel, you'd never felt connected to. You didn't really feel like you were ever, imprinting part of yourself on that person. Now you're just doing that with somebody that you're committed to. It doesn't magically transform into something of more significance on a fundamental level. In your mind, it can be. It's like, well, this is my wife now. That makes it special. No, it needed to be special even when it wasn't your wife, because it's supposed to do these certain things for you. And again, I know that sounds, like I said, it's coming from a place, I'm not trying to be heavy-handed or make people feel bad about it. It's just food for thought. If you go, you know what, sex, I can have sex casually and it's not a big deal. Think about whether that should be the case or not, and whether or not that's how that magically will change once you find the love of your life. Because sex is still sex. You're doing it to a different person. You're doing it with another person. But if it didn't have the significance before, what's magically going to change after that party that's going to make it now something more profound? So anyway, food for thought. So that's about it. And I just want to say for folks who have, had sex and maybe are regretting it or have regretted it, just don't believe the lie that you're used goods. I hate that phrase. I hate it with a passion. You are not used goods. There's, we talk about normalization. There's a normalization out there for, that communicates, especially with women. Hey, if you're past a certain age, if you're past your sexual prime, if you're past the age where you're all, cute and glamorous and you're starting to show some signs of age, you have no more value, or you need to put out in order to show the guy that you have value, because, the guys are looking for X, Y, and Z. That's a normalized mentality, and it's absolutely wrong. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't guys who buy into it, that there aren't women who buy into that, but do not look at yourself as lesser than, or with this defeated mindset, meaning like that virginity or being a virgin is a binary. In essence, it is. You're either a virgin or you're not. But don't look at it as, well, if I'm not a virgin now, I lost my virginity when I was 18, so I might as well just keep having sex, because I'm not going to become less of a virgin. I'm already not one. I've already given that up. Don't give up on that. There is no, and I don't care what anybody says, the right guy, and I'm speaking to women, but again, it applies for men too. I just hear it. The guys that I trained with were sharing this perspective, and it just nauseated me a little bit. But it's like, you are not a tease if you say, you know what, sex, I want it to mean something more. It does mean something more. It's made my relationships more complicated. It's muddied the water. It's made me not sure how much I really know this person, how well we've actually connected, how meaningful we are to each other, because it just made it very complicated. When it wasn't there, it felt like I was missing a huge part of our relationship. And so I don't want to continue to do that. The next time I have sex, I want it to be with somebody that I'm committed to for the rest of my life. The right person is going to respect that. They're not going to see that as a tease. They're going to say, okay, that's great. Because ultimately what that is saying is, hey, if you marry me, that sex is going to mean something to me. It's going to be very important. I do think it is going to do things for our relationship that nothing else can do, that it is the signature on this contract. And therefore it's going to be something special. Inherently, it'll be special. A guy should value that. A woman should value that. They should respect that. And like I said, I know there are some people I've talked to gals who say, if he's not kissing me, if we don't have this physical part of the relationship, I don't feel like I'm attractive. That's not going to change when you ramp up the physical. It may give the illusion that it does, but if you do not have the confidence, if he is not conveying to you how much he cherishes you, how valuable you are, how worthwhile you are without the physical stuff, then you're not going to feel it afterward. You're more than likely going to feel used afterward, or it's going to devolve into something else, or it's going to be now you've trained yourself for later on in your relationship. If that physical intimacy isn't there for whatever reason, if he's not kissing you, if you're not being physical, then okay, well, do you stop loving me? You don't love me anymore? No, I do. I'm too tired, or I'm too whatever. I'm not in the right space for it. Or just because I'm not kissing you doesn't mean I don't love you. Well, you've established that as a foundation. Hey, this is how I tell you I love you. And I will say this: physical intimacy, kissing, making out, I can vouch for that part. I know that part. It's very good at expressing love. It's not good at communicating. Physical intimacy, again, I think there's a distinction. It's very fine, but there's a difference between expression and communication. And those things are very good at expressing things. They can say, in a manner of speaking, a without using words, but it doesn't actually communicate. They don't substitute each other. The physical should always enhance your actual relationship. Making out, kissing should enhance what you have spoken, what you've communicated to each other. Sex, the commitment, should enhance the closeness and the relational intimacy you've already established. That's my take on it anyway. That's my 2 cents. So I just want to encourage people to not see yourself as lesser than, to not feel bad about that, to not carry around the weight or the guilt of that. Shake it off. It's a decision we make in life. Yes, for better, for worse, we cannot put the tube back in the toothpaste. And I understand that is a crass analogy considering what we're talking about, but it can't be undone. But that doesn't mean it's over. And that doesn't mean you just kind of give up on it and say, well, it's just never going to happen. Hold true to that. And if you've seen and witnessed in your life that sex has actually made a mess of things, don't feel bad about saying, I don't want to do that until I know for a fact that our relationship has a firm foundation underneath of it. And that's about it. I had a friend ask me not long ago if I ever thought that I was going to get married. And honestly, I don't know. That right now, honestly, is in the realm of the miraculous. You got, okay, parting of the Red Sea, not bad. That's pretty impressive. Raising people from the dead, yeah, I'll call that awesome. But me finding the love of my life at this point, that seems a little far-fetched. I know that sounds ridiculous, but that is kind of that way. But and I'm happy to say, you hear the term, beggars can't be choosers. I'm not a beggar. You're not a beggar. I actually have become more, as I get older, as I've been, spend more time single and I experience more of my life single. I appreciate being single. I appreciate the freedom that I have. And so I actually am less inclined to give that up for, to settle, because I'm like, I like my life as it is now, unless it is going to be better, unless my life and her life are both exponentially improved by us being together, by us becoming one. I'm not going to bother with it because I like being single. I enjoy it. I don't need sex in my life. I can live a nice life without having that part there. I can live a nice life without having that love. And that's the other part of it is there's that phrase. It's insipid. It's the dumbest phrase that I've ever heard. Love is love. That's a big nothing burger. There are so many facets to love. There are so many levels to love. There are so many different kinds of love. The love that I have for my mother is not the love that I'm going to have for my wife. The love that I have for my guy friends is not the same love that I have for the gals in my life. The love that I have for my sister is not the same that I would have the love for my brother. The love that I have for my brother or my sister is not going to be the same that I have the love that I have for a friendship. There are so many different levels and nuances of love that to just say, oh, love is love. Yes, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that one love applies to everything. There are so many different kinds of it. And I realized that I was doing a disservice to myself, and I was almost it was almost disrespectful to the love that I've had in my life to be fixated on that particular aspect, to say, okay, my wife, that is going to be a special, unique kind of love. And I want to have the day come where I can actually walk hand in hand with the love of my life towards life's final sunset. I do long for that. I do want that, but I don't want to ignore or belittle the love that I have experienced in my life. I'm very fortunate to have had loving parents. A lot of people don't experience love from their parents. They don't feel loved and cherished by the people who brought them into the world. They have siblings who they're estranged from, who they've had conflict with, who they maybe they even hate each other. They don't know what that love is like to feel that from a sibling. I am very fortunate. So to discredit that and to just fixate on the love that I'm going to have from my bride, for my wife, it seems to diminish that, and it seems to discount that. And I caught myself in that and just realized, you know what? I'm very fortunate. There are people who leave this world never knowing what it's like to be loved by their mother or their father. Maybe they don't even get to know their mother or their father for various reasons. I am very blessed. I am very fortunate. So in no way, shape, or form am I going to consider my life at the end of my days, if I look back and I'm still single, I am not going to consider my life diminished in any way because I have known love. And I think that just about does it. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of A Podcaster Says What. Hopefully it's been educational or enlightening, entertaining at the very least, even if you think I'm a complete nut job for what I have to say. At least it gives you another perspective, another opinion. I don't think that opinion is circulating. I don't know how many virgins there are at my age that are out there. Maybe there could be a ton of them. Like I said, I don't think it's anything special per se, but I don't know that this perspective gets a lot of discussion. So I thought I'd put it out there, and just the more you know, right? Anyway, thanks again so much for watching. Take care.